Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Goodwin with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History's Lunch program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We're in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the Museum of Mississippi History and Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and if you have not already done so, please silence your cell phones. Tomorrow at 11:30 a.m., Paige Mizell of Mizell's Camellia Hill Nursery will lead a free guided camellia walk through the Welty Garden, and heirloom varieties of camellias will be for sale. You can find more information on the Eudora Welty House and Gardens Facebook page. Also tomorrow at 7 p.m., we'll have the premiere of the MDAH film The Defenders, How Lawyers Protected the Movement, here in this auditorium. You can watch the trailer on the department's YouTube channel, but I hope that you will all plan to be here for it. It's going to be fabulous. And then I hope that you'll be back next week for History's Lunch, when Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, Speaker of the House Philip Gunn, Senator Briggs Hopson, Senator Derek Simmons, and Representative Robert Johnson will discuss the process of adopting the new Mississippi state flag. Complimentary box lunches from the Nissan Cafe by Nick Wallace will be provided by the Community Foundation for Mississippi. Today, we are delighted to welcome Calvin Head and Leroy Johnson to tell the story of the Milestone Cooperative in Holmes County. Calvin Head is a farmer and the director of the Milestone Cooperative Association, which he helped reorganize. He has more than 15 years of experience as a community organizer. Head earned his BS in social science from Mississippi Valley State University and did advanced coursework in public administration at Jackson State University. Leroy Johnson is vice president of the Holmes County Board of Supervisors. He's worked as an organizer, trainer, and manager of movement organizations for more than 40 years and has been a visiting lecturer at Harvard University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 1989, he co-founded Southern Echo, a social justice, training, and development organization. We'll hear from both our speakers, one after the other. First will be Leroy Johnson, followed by Calvin Head. Help me welcome Leroy Johnson.
Now, let me say this. I'm from the Delta of Mississippi. I come from a good Baptist church. A good Baptist church now, a good Baptist church. And when we say good evening or good afternoon or good morning, the only way that we know it's a good afternoon or a good morning if we get a response. Now, y'all act like it was just afternoon, that it wasn't good. Right? So I'm asking you to give me a good afternoon versus, it's afternoon and my stomach ain't bothering me right. So if you would just do that, I'm going to say this one more time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Whew, now I feel like I'm the Delta and come to Jackson, Mississippi. All right. I want to say that Mississippi Archives and History talked to us and came to us about looking at some communities and some work in Holmes County. Holmes County is actually the geographical center of the state of Mississippi. There's a long Highway 55 right after you pass the Pickens exit. That is the geographical center of the state. It is also the place where the Delta and the hills meet. And it is a place where when you see up in the morning time and it's a crisp, clean day, you can see all the way to Yazoo City. You can see all the way to Kruger, Mississippi. You can see all the way to the rolling hills of Carroll County. But you got to have a good eye. And everybody in this room has a good eye. And we want you to have an opportunity to figure out why it's important for us to talk about Holmes County and why we love the place. And so what happened was that we had a discussion about a historical marker. And we were talking about where we're going to put that marker. And we thought about Mileston, Mississippi. Right now, Milestone don't have one of them city emblems. It don't even have one of them town emblems. It has one of them village emblems. But it's always have been a community where it has been the pride of the county. And let us say that what we want to do about this historical marker was to look at this whole question of the Milestone Cooperative, the oldest black cooperative in the United States of America. The oldest one, coming out of the New Deal, an experiment of a black community having its own economic engine to move agriculture in the Delta. And so when we met those days, when we first met, it was Cabin, who was the director of the cooperative. One of our supervisors, Alfonso Greer for District 5, who lives on the west end of the county, in the Chula community, right? And me, District 4 supervisor. Now, since that time, Alfonso has passed away. He died in a tragic car accident last year, right? And I want to say that this first part of this film is in recognition and a memorial to Alfonso, and he was a radio personality, and they called him Big Money. Now, he didn't have no money, but they called him Big Money. Because I tried to borrow some from him, and he told me he didn't have none to be, but I could borrow. But he was big money. And everybody knew him all over the state of Mississippi as Big Money Greer, right? And so we want to say that this first part of this is a look at what happened in those days when we were looking at finding out where we were going to put the marker, why Milestone should have a marker, why the Milestone Cooperative should have a marker, and why we should lift up this community on the west side of the county of Holmes. And so we want to do that, have this opportunity to have that to happen, and for you to see him in his glory, and see Big Money. in honor of Big Money Greer. The Milestone Freedom Movement. And we're going to start by looking at Milestone in 1939, 1940. And then again, looking at pictures that take you into 1960. These are where sharecroppers lived in the Milestone community on Marcella Plantation. The Milestone Cooperative had a store. It had a post office. It grew to have a clinic. For the first opportunity for black folks to be able to go to the doctor without having to go to the back door. All in the delta of Mississippi. And there used to be a question about, can anything good come out of the delta besides cotton? And what we were saying was that the people who made the living for the folk who owned the plantation should also have the same livelihood, the same humanity as the folk who lived in the plantation. And let me say to you that what folks don't understand is that we had plantations, Quaffalona Plantation, the Marcella Plantation, right? But we also had places. So white folk who didn't have a plantation, they had a place. So the Montgomery family had a place, right? And they knew where their place was. And everybody knew the sharecroppers who lived on the Montgomery place. Not necessarily just that they had a plantation, but they had a place. If they had over 500 acres of land, but actually 300 acres of land, they had a place. And so they didn't have to have a plantation, they had a place. So you had the Montgomery plantation, you had the Jones place, right? You had the Oliver place, right? You had the Tollerville place, right? All these people were white folk who had at least 300 acres of land and had tenant farmers working that land. And so after Milestone came into being and they got this 10,000 acres and they divided up in between these 100 families, they started growing cotton, the same cotton they were growing for the plantations and the place. And then the plantation owners and the place owners decided that when they brought their cotton, the black folk brought their cotton to be gin, they had to wait until they gin everybody else's cotton before they would get to their cotton. And so even when they thought they had won, because the federal government had given them their 40 acres and a mule, but it was a tractor, old tractor, sometimes the mule had to pull it. But it was what they had. And they couldn't get their cotton gin. So that cotton would sit out in the fields and rot. While white folk were getting their cotton gin. And so Milestone had to get the resources from the federal government to build their own gin. And see that person right there? That's a 500-pound bale of cotton. And that's one person moving 500 pounds of cotton. And then they said we were lazy. This is a teacher and her students from the Milestone community. This is the teacher Miss Clary Brown. And then she was teaching students. Oh, and one of them folk is her daughter. Right there. And her daughter's here today. And she taught elementary to 8th grade. And so you see all these children, they're from elementary to 8th grade. And she taught them all in class, side of a one-room class setting. The picture over to your right is young boys waiting in a plantation store to be paid for picking cotton. Right? And this was on the Marcella plantation. Right? And they had to wait, right? And the answer was, could you pick a bale of cotton a day? A bale of cotton a day. Now, it took at least 1,500 pounds of cotton to get a 500-pound bale. So every family was trying to pick at least one bale of cotton per day. That was the only way you would be able to make a living. To pay your note, put food on the table, and get any other thing that you needed. You had to do that. And it was a struggle. And sure, there was a struggle in my family because I could never get more than 89 pounds. And that was all day. My mama decided, she said, boy, you can't pick no cotton. And I said, thank you, Jesus. This is the Milestone School. Right? This was the first school, and this particular building was a Rosenwald building. And folk thought, said, well, the Rosenwald gave you the money to have the school, but they didn't understand that you had to match it dollar for dollar. Rosenwald wouldn't give you anything unless you could match it dollar for dollar. So black folk had to match even Rosenwald money dollar for dollar. And if you wanted something beyond the basic building, then you had to go and get that yourself. So in Hattiesburg, they decided that they wanted a brick one. And so they built a brick school, and only thing Rosenwald gave them to build this brick school was $1,500. It cost $48,000. So think about it. How much the black community had to put forward even in Rosenwald schools. They ended up tearing this building down. It was a historical building, but it ended up being torn down. I want to tell you that in 1963, these same folk who had established the Milestone Cooperative were the same folk who started the freedom movement in Holmes County. 4 individuals from the Milestone community, Reverend Russell being one of those, Harmon Tumbo being another one of those, Mr. Ozell Mitchell being another one of those. And it was one other, he was a Davis, Mr. Davis. And they went over to Greenwood to meet with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They didn't go up 49 and go through Chula and go on up the road through Kruger and up to Greenwood. They went the back road. Couldn't go up the front road because they were afraid they were going to be seen by going up 49. And they knew that if they got seen going up 49, because here's what they had to understand, is black folk knew their place. And they, the white folk, knew what place they belonged to. And so when you got outside of your place, they brought you back to your place. So they said the Fugitive Slave Act was gone, but in 1963, it was still present in Holmes County. And so they went over and had a conversation with Bob Moses and told him that they wanted to be part of the freedom movement. And Bob told them, said, well, we're talking about a civil rights movement. They said, no, we're talking about a freedom movement. Because we want to have all of the same freedoms that everybody else have. And so they went and began to have this whole idea of a freedom movement. And they brought it back to Holmes County, to the Milestone community. And Milestone became the cradle of the freedom movement in Holmes County. They went through Belzoni, cut around and went through Mineral City and came out on the other side and got to Greenwood and had that conversation with Bob and the rest of the SNCC folk and the leadership of SNCC. And they said, well, we'll come and we'll be part of this with you, and we'll teach you the things that you need to do. And Reverend Russell said, I believe in this nonviolent movement. And he said, I take my weapon with me everywhere I go. And he was Baptist minister, and he had a satchel. That's what they call it now. I don't know. Y'all call it a briefcase today. But he had a satchel. Right? Reverend Russell had a satchel. And he reached off in his satchel, and he said, I got my weapon in my satchel. And he reached off in his satchel, and he pulled it up, and it was the Bible. He said the Bible cut both ways, left and right, going and coming. He said, but it don't leave a mark. He said, just the only thing it does is preach love. And so that was Reverend Russell. But Harmon Tumbo, who was the leader of the Holmes County freedom movement, said, yeah, I went to war, and they taught me some things. He said, I don't mind that we're going to be nonviolent. He said, but I'm going to protect myself. That's what they taught me in war, is to protect yourself. So I'm going to be nonviolent, but I'm going to defend myself. And so Reverend Russell was fighting with the Bible. And Harmon Tumbo said, I got a 16-shot, 22 rifle. And so the Milestone community brought the SNCC folk over, and within a month, 1963, in a month, while Harmon Tumbo and Reverend Russell and others of the leadership was having a community meeting, they came to his house and cut through the windows, the screen on his windows, and that's the house right there. And they cut these screens out, and they cut the screen here, and they started a fire at his home. Now his wife was there, and 2 white nurses were there who were working in the clinic. They told him about it. And they came back to the house. They put the fire out. But that was just to get him to the house. Because once he got there, then here come the Klan. And they start shooting at his house. And Bob Moses and 3 other SNCC people were in the room with him. And Bob said, we don't do this. We got to stay nonviolent. And he said, I ain't being nonviolent. I'm just defending myself. And he used all 16 rounds of them 22s. And then there were some other black folk who were called the Veterans for Defense, because those veterans who had come back from World War II, who had come back from Korea, who had went to Vietnam and who had gotten back from Vietnam, was saying we know how to defend ourselves. Then the War Department taught us how. And so they became the deacons. They became the deacons of defense in Louisiana. We had the Veterans for Defense in the Milestone community. And they taught others to do the same thing all over the county. And folk from all over the county came to Milestone to learn how to be part of the freedom movement. And so this is still Harmon Tumbo's house to this day. He has a nephew who lives in that house. So all are trying to burn him out, all are trying to shoot him out. He lived in that house. Him and his wife lived in that house the whole time. And there were others who went to the meeting. So one of those folk was, I'll tell you the story, one of these folk was somebody I called Jack Lewis. I called him Mr. Jack. And that's all I knew his name was Mr. Jack. I found out his name was T.L. Lewis, was Tommy Lee. But once you know, that's all you know. That's the only thing you know. So I called him Jack Lewis, Mr. Jack, Mr. Jack, Mr. Jack. Mr. Jack came to the meeting. He said, I brought my 2 lawyers. And folk were looking around for his lawyers. New mayor Leventhal was in the community. So they thought they were going to find Mel, or they were going to find one of the other civil rights attorneys, right? They thought they were going to find Reuben Anderson. But Reuben wasn't there, and Mel wasn't there, and Marion Wright wasn't there, right? Who turned into be Elderman. But Marion Wright wasn't there, right? And he looked, and they said, well, where your 2 lawyers? He had a double-barrel shotgun. He said, that's lawyer 1, and he's lawyer 2. He said, I'm going to sit by the door so that just in case, I know it was a door there. I learned some English, so it was a door. But he said, I'm going to sit by the door. Right? And then at the door is where lawyer 1 and lawyer 2 sit, waiting if they came past the checkpoints that had been designed by the Veterans for Defense. Now we had Edgar Love who was from the Milestone community, and Eugene Montgomery, the Montgomery family had come down to Milestone to learn how to be part of the freedom movement. And they went up and they challenged the sheriff. They went up and challenged the sheriff, Andrew Smith. That's Billy Joe Gilmore, right? And that's the police chief right there, right? That's Eugene, and that's Edgar, right? And they came and they challenged them around police brutality. So it wasn't just about the right to vote. It was about having all of the freedoms that everybody else had. That's why it was called a freedom movement. And one of those folks, Mr. Ozell Mitchell, and I want us to understand that it wasn't just the men, it was also the women of the movement. Look who was there. I'm trying to learn how to work this thing the right way, right? Emma Mitchell, Carnegie, Anna B. Mitchell, who was Mr. Mitchell's wife, C. Bell Turnbow, Mr. Turnbow's wife, Caldonia Davis, Mary Turnbow, who was his sister, right? Florence Blackman, and right over here, running through the crowd, is Roger Heads, Rogers. And let me tell you, that ain't none of me, but that was me. In that, my dad took me to those meetings, right? I was the oldest child in the family, and Rogers, actually, me and him graduated in the same class. He was a year older than me. And I want you to understand that this was an intergenerational model, and they brought young people to the process, right? And we learned. And I often tell folk that I'm a lap and pallet baby of the movement. Because we ran around, and when we got a little bit too rambunctious, I learned that in college, so I thought I'd use that word for y'all. I got a little rambunctious. They would put me on the pallet and say, lay down, boy. We'd lay down, and we would go to sleep, and we'd wake up with them singing a song, right? And when we woke up, and it got really, really good, and we went to moving. You know how you go to moving when you're young? You just go to jumping around. They said, come here, baby. Come here, baby. Sit in my lap. Right? Sit in my lap. And that's what I did. I moved from pallet to lap. Right? And I learned to be a pallet and lap baby of the freedom movement. When they had the march in 1966 with James Meredith, over 200 Holmes Countyans marched in the march. From the Tennessee line to Jackson, Mississippi. Of that, over 200 from over 150 were from the Milestone community. This was the Holmes County candidates for the freedom ticket. Robert G. Clark running again, and Robert G. Clark was the first one in 1967 to be elected. Eddie Logan ran in for superintendent, and Willie James Burns, and then he got to be a reverend after he lost for candidate for sheriff. Right? He decided the Lord must be calling him, but some of the other higher calling rather than the sheriff business. Right? And all of these were those folk who ran in 1971 on the freedom ticket. Right? And Robert Clark would tell a story about my dad. In 1967, when he ran and he won his first time, and they couldn't find nobody who were willing to go and be a poll watcher in Coxbury, Mississippi. And in Coxbury was what we call the Four Corners, right? And it was the Four Corners, and they had this place. It was right next door to Yazoo County. And what happened during the elections is that the folk in Holmes County, white folk in Holmes County would vote, and then the white folk who lived right across the street, right down the road, in Yazoo County would come up to Coxbury and vote. And Robert Clark recognized that the only way he could win if he could stop them white folk from coming from Yazoo County to vote. Two people said they would come, and there were some bad folk, right? But two people said they would come and be poll watchers for him. That was my dad. My dad was he used to say, I'm 5'7" tall. right? 5'7" tall, meaning that he decided that that's how tall he was. Now, he was 5'6¾", but he wanted to make sure that folk understand he was 5'7" tall. And so in that, he built out a process, and him and Miss Hattie Jordan, still, because they moved in couples, right? Him and Miss Hattie Jordan, male and female, right? And they went together, and they got there, and there they was in the midst of the process. And here was Mr. Oscar Price. He was 6'4", white guy with overalls on, and he had two guns. One gun in his pocket on the right side, and one gun in his pocket on the left side, and a gun with big old guns, and they stuck out. And he said it was strange to see this big old tall white man, and here James R. Johnson, this tall, this little 6'4" versus 5'7", and James jumping up in his face and pointing his finger in his face, right? He had to jump up to reach his face, so he would jump up and reach him and say, "You ain't none of them folk gonna vote," right? But see, Daddy had two guns in his back pocket, though, right? That kind of weighed him down, so hard for him to jump too high, right? But I'm saying is that our folk were willing to fight the fight and do the deed, right? And so this chronological events of Holmes County, and I want to tell you that you can find that in Mind State on Freedom, right? The Civil Rights Struggle in the Rural South and Oral History by the youth of the Rural Organizing and Cultural Center. And the reason I bring that forward is because at the time when this book was written, and these young folks wrote this book, I was the vice president of ROC, and I helped found ROC, the Rural Organizing and Cultural Center, as a young person trying to work in Holmes County. And so this is the product of their work about doing the black history of Holmes County from a black perspective. So I'm going to end on that. Cabin, come up. And this is the thing I want to tell you. I want to leave you with these kind of 4 quotes. One is from George Santana, and he says, "Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it." If we don't learn history, we're doomed to repeat it. And William Churchill said, "The longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward." Churchill. Now, 2 men who, to me, were more brilliant than both of these. My granddaddy said, "Get your understanding first." These folk understood. They understood that it was the grassroots folk. It was the dirt farmer. That they learned that if you plant a seed, it had a root. And if you really wanted freedom to be, freedom had to be rooted. It had to grow out of the work that folks did. It had to be in their heart, and it had to be in their head. And the last thing I'll leave you with is what my daddy told me. He said, "Boy, there's no right way to do wrong. I don't care how you dress it up, it's still wrong. It is wrong. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. The freedom movement has to keep moving forward, because for all of us to be free, we all got to be a part of the movement."
Good afternoon. Before I get started, I just want to say, caution you that I'm not a great speaker or presenter, but I can assure you that I have lived this history and this struggle and this continues today. And I want to say that a lot of the pictures that you saw as a little boy, I grew up around that environment. Little did I know, as I used to play a lot in the settings, that the struggles and the fears and the concerns that our parents, and one of the pictures was my mother, and she's still alive and well. And I had a conversation with her about what was different. For some reason, I talked to a lot of older people, and I was saying, what's different from back then to now? But my task is to bring us up to, I guess, today's. Leroy, you want to use this for me? So I won't be very long at all. But I do want to say that I asked her that question. I asked a lot of older people, what was different than those people back in the day than us? And that's my mother. She was a huge part. I said she was a huge part, but she still is a huge part of the struggle. So I asked them. I asked them what was different, and she told me a couple of things that I want to just highlight and bring us into, not trying to compare, but to try to figure out what's happening now and what happened then, which is two different settings. Perhaps now the new enemy and the new oppressor is the poverty and the pandemic that we face in these communities. Systematic racism is still there, but we don't have to be a victim of that anymore. And the one thing she said was that if a man said something back then, he meant it. His word was his bond. That was the glue that kept them together. That was the assurance they had that there was commitment. And I just look at over the years, and I'm going to get to this very quickly. I just look at over the years how people come in and I want to say, prostitute communities like Milestone. The Smithsonian did a big documentary about Milestone. People have written books. People have done all kind of publications, but none of the royalties ever make it back. You know, they interview our people to death. A few older people like my mom, you know, they just tell the story over and over again, and people made money off it. So they'll come in and lie to them or, you know, sell them a false dream, but they never let anything come back to the community. And then she said that people were committed back then. Having a supervisor like Mr. Johnson, he's in the community, he's in the trenches. There was a lady who passed, who called me one day, and she said, you know, it just breaks my heart to ride through Milestone. Nothing is happening. You know, nothing is there. You know, all the years, you know, it's just nothing. And when we began to show her what's happening now, you know, I said, that's the problem. You just passed through. You didn't stop and seal. You didn't stop all of the concerns you had and all the energy. Why not put that energy into the community? Because I declare to you that demographically, you know, you can read all the bad things about Holmes County, about Milestone and small communities. Demographically, I didn't know this, but young people make up a huge population in communities like Milestone. So what we need in Milestone and other communities is opportunities. Everything that they left, everything they fought for. I didn't know this, and it certainly wasn't by design. As one of the organizers or the leaders in the community, everything that they started, we have continued. This store, it's not like the old store that you saw, but it's still a store that's alive and well. The first Head Start started in Milestone. We've maintained a daycare center in Milestone. I want to say this, the previous administration closed down our school and our Head Start. The school building that you're going to see, it was unoccupied for about 4.5 years, and I don't know if it was a pushback from the community, but they literally destroyed the building. Never had been vandalized before in the history of the school, but the minute it shut down, they destroyed it. And the cooperative had an opportunity to take over that school after the school district said it wasn't feasible to keep it open. But we knew the history behind it. Not necessarily as a school, but now a community center with a daycare center inside of it, because we lost the only two institutions in the community. And that was that Head Start Center and that was the school, other than churches. So they are still alive and well, and it was a challenge because we were saying, how do we maintain a 22,000 square feet facility with limited resources when a school district with a state budget said it wasn't feasible to maintain? But we've never had the lights cut off. We've created a hydroponic system. Let me just say this, Milestone Cooperative historically is an agricultural cooperative, and it's been the glue inside of the community for years. So all of the work we do is centered around agriculture, but our tentacles kind of expand into economic and community development because we got to create opportunities for those young people who are migrating outside of, they were just leaving them by the busload, and you couldn't blame them. So the one thing our ancestors and those people like my mom and them fought for was opportunity. And that's what we're saying. We got to have opportunity for people to live, to work, and we can't keep saying poor, poor us. We're the poorest this, the poorest that. That should be the crutch that we build on to make things happen. We don't have to be poor and desolate. No, I don't have anything. Those people back then didn't starve, and neither should we. This scares me when I think about it. That's my son right over there. He's in college now. And when I grew up, everybody had a garden. They had peach trees. They had orchards. They had, even in nature, muscadine, persimmon, stuff that we can literally just go and eat. And I was grateful that corn and soybeans took precedent in agriculture, so they drove out the boll weevil and they killed everything in nature. So from an environmental perspective, he won't see the kind of things that I came up with. Even some of the insects are extinct right now. But opportunity exists in Milestone. This hydroponic system, when it comes online, will create 22 jobs right there in Milestone. We'll be able to grow vegetables inside of a controlled environment year-round. We already have buyers and markets set up. What you see on the other end, we're participating in a food box program right now that we're able to employ like 15 people regularly. It's a joy in being able to give them checks every week, that we're actually developing and making stuff inside of the community, because we got to do this from the inside out. People are not going to come in and build any factories, and we're not asking for any handouts, but just give us an opportunity to, don't step on our necks. Let us survive and let us grow. Let us work and be men and live productive lives. We don't have to be in the shape we're in Holmes County. So that's what Milestone is trying to do now. A lot of those men you see on that video that's working in the food box program, they're in this room right now. And that's an opportunity that we're going to continue, that we're going to develop and grow food. Like somebody said, people got to eat. It's not going anywhere. And even with the pandemic, as much as I hate to say this, it created opportunity. Even with the inclement weather patterns, it created opportunities to grow food, to produce food, to distribute food, to create jobs and places. So we're not where we want to be. And I'm not saying we're a well-oiled machine. There are still a lot of issues, a lot of challenges. But we are as resilient as they were when they left all this land to us. One last thing I'm going to say, and we're going to take questions. Out of all the land that was left from that New Deal settlement package, all those people that were distributing land, I only know of one that actually lost their land, one family in the Milestone Marcella community. Some of the kids saw their land as a liability instead of an asset, and they sold it. But everybody else have been resilient, and especially all the members of the co-op. They're holding on to their land in spite of all the deliberate schemes to take their land, all of the discrimination from the USDA. We're going to use that land in production this week, and we're going to move truckloads of products right out of Milestone. The only other thing about it that's really good, we'll be able to eat healthy. We're not going to starve. There's too many lakes with fish, and there's too much stuff. We're keeping food around Milestone. But anyway, so thank the Lord for the opportunity for us to highlight our ancestors and those who fought so hard just for us to take this time and say, we appreciate you, and we're not going to let go all that you left for us. We're going to fight and hold on to it. We're going to work, and we're going to change this system from the inside out. So now we'll take time for any questions.
If anyone has any questions, you raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for such a wonderful presentation. Don't ever apologize for what you have to offer. Thank you so much. My question is, do you guys have a 4-H club? And just how important do you think that is? Because if you're going to grow food, you also need to know how to can food. And I'll come up definitely and learn from you.
Well, I won't say so much of a 4-H club, but there's a value-added part of the work. And one thing I missed on this film is a process called intercropping. You know, like I said, a lot of people had peach trees, fruit trees, and so now we've incorporated all of that back into production. So as more products and crops come into fold, we're going to plan how to do that kind of stuff. It comes up a lot in our conversation, and we know a lot of older people who has that experience and expertise, so we just need to incorporate it back into the overall scheme of things. But right now we're just not trying to so much export stuff, but we're trying to set up direct markets that we can make sure food is available where we are. And then we'll try to get into more value-added type stuff.
And they have 4-H on the east side of the county, but we don't have 4-H on the west side. And we're on the west side, which is in the Delta, right? And you could see that you would think that the Delta would have a 4-H because you got all of this land, you got all of this stuff to really work the process with. But the powers that be decided that the 4-H was going to be on the east side rather than on the west side, where it would do I think the most good. And so we were fighting for the west side. We were fighting for the west side to come back to its full bloom, right, and become the production that it used to do. And so we need someone who could help us to work that into the process that we're trying to do in Milestone community.
Wonderful presentation. And we have here, right next to me, the only president of the FDP that exists in Holmes County, Mr. Cardell Wright, the Freedom Democratic Party president, the only one that exists in Holmes County. He's here.
And let me say about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and having the only one that's left. The one that's left was organized by Fannie Lou Hamer. Right. It is the Fannie Lou Hamer branch that is still left as a part of the process. And one of the slides that I had was of Fannie Lou speaking at the Holmes County Courthouse, laying out why the importance of the cooperative, the importance of working together and being organized as a community. And let me say the other thing that folks don't know about the MFDP in Holmes County is that they had a economic development piece connected to it and a housing piece connected to it that Fannie Lou put in personally, right? And so, I had an uncle who I didn't like a lot of times. I loved him all the time, but I didn't like him a lot of times. 'Cause my mama told me I could do that. I could love folk, but I didn't have to like them, right? So inside of that was my Uncle Joseph Johnson, and what he did was sold the FDP 80 acres of land for $10. $10. And then they took that and put 10 families who had got put off of the place or out of the plantation and sold them the land, 5 acres and up, right? And the only thing you had to put in there was a community center to go along with that, building that community inside on that 80 acres of land. And that still exists today, and we still have a community center. It's called the Howard Community Center. It's right there today, And there's 10 families around that community center who bought that land that my dad was trying to buy that he sold to the FDP, and I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't like him for that. But, you know, it was a good thing. I found out his name was listed on the annals of the civil rights movement folk and the freedom movement folk in Holmes County, and I was trying to figure out how his name get down there. That's what it was, though.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a marvelous presentation. I was born in 1939 in Quitman County, so I could relate to almost everything that you said, especially not being able to pick 100 pounds of cotton when you were expected to do 200 pounds. But I didn't hear you mention cows as a part of your co-op. And I do believe that in the Delta, if you're going to raise vegetables and plums and pears and muscadines and all of those things, you have to have a cow if you're going to have a garden. How much value do you still place on that in your co-op?
Well, there's a farmers, we got farmers as high as 2,000 acres, and they're growing traditional crops as well. They're farmers who, one of our older farmers has a cattle program, and he, produces cows. And we've been trying to get them to diversify and get into alternative farming practices. And we're not exclusively involved in vegetables, but there are traditional farmers who are, into cattle and also other crops. So I just didn't mention that because the nucleus of what we're trying to do right now is not limited to that. It's produced for these large markets while the opportunities exist.
One last question.
It's kind of two.
Oh.
Sorry. Can you gentlemen speak to the things you've learned during COVID, the resilience that you illustrated through COVID in the community, the farming community, things you've learned? Sorry, that is kind of all over the place. And then the second thing is I know you're very active in having youth involved in learning farming and seeing that you can make a real wage. Can you speak to that, even if you don't have a 4-H, how you're involving the youth in that same kind of pallet to lap mentality, maybe?
Sure. Well, farmers in the cooperative are kind of up in age like me, and we don't have the energy or the resilience that we used to have or the stamina. And trying to get farmers to diversify and get into alternative crops required coming off this heavy equipment and getting out in the field with hands. And a lot of young people don't even like that, so it's a challenge. But we saw them as a labor force inside of the packaging shed, inside of the hydroponic system. They'll be heavily recruited to be employed. But they're a huge part of what we do for that reason, mainly. Then
Young folks, stand up. I want you to see
Oh, yeah.
the young people who've been doing the packaging plant.
And to see them get, and they'll tell you, we don't nearly get paid enough, but we're going to grow into that. We're talking about $15 an hour starting pay eventually, and ultimately we'll get to that. But they are a huge part. And I got to say this. So we were blessed to, from the Food Safety Modernization Act, that requires a lot of USDA certification and good agriculture practices. This young man, Jamero, he is one of the only young men in the country, I would say, because we hadn't seen him. This young man and another young man, I got sick, and when the auditor came out to do our food safety audit, they went through it with a breeze, and we got our first food safety certificate from their participation. So we're teaching them. So I mean, you can't get into these big markets unless you're GAP certified. But the other part, real quickly, about COVID, it's still a fear to me. I see so many people in the community don't take it seriously. Most of them probably asymptomatic, and you just don't think it'll affect them, and nobody's kind of concentrating on practicing safe distance or mask. And, you know, I'm scared someday that it's going to be a huge epidemic in Chula and Milestone and other places because they're all congested, and they just don't take it seriously enough.
And I just want to say that part of what we've been looking at is this whole question of an intergenerational model of building out how we move forward. There's a lot of discussion with folks around passing the baton from the older people to the younger people, right? We believe in passing the baton, but one of the things that Fannie Lou Hamer said is that we let my little light shine. And so what we were talking about is torch bearing, right? And everybody should have a torch. And the more we build torches in our community, the more we drive out darkness with light. And so what we're trying to say to folks is pass the baton, but also hold on to your light, right? We need for folks to hold on to the light, because the more light that we can shine, the better off we all are. And so we're trying to build a process where we're not just passing the baton, we're holding on to the light, and we're trying to develop more and more torches so that we can have the little light that Fannie Lou Hamer talked about, right? Letting it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Thank
Can we just recognize one more person in the audience? Sure. We have Mr. Jack Double Barrel Louis' great-grandson.
And he's also a McLaurin.
He's also a McLaurin, yeah. And McLaurin is, Griffin McLaurin is on the historical marker that we're doing. It's going to have two of our old soldiers who passed on, Harmon Tumbo and Reverend Russell. And then we'll have two existing folks who are still living, Griffin McLaurin, right, who you saw who was running for supervisor for District 4 on one of the pictures there, and Ms. Head, Cabin's mother, right? So we were trying to say that we're looking at the folks who have passed on, but also the lights that are still burning as a part of the process. And so it's a good thing, and it's a wonderful thing, and we really want to push forward as a part of that process. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here today. Remember that we have the Defenders documentary premiere at 7 o'clock here tomorrow. Come back next Wednesday for History is Lunch with the state lawmakers as we discuss the state flag changeover. But for now, help me thank Carolyn Gray Primer, who put together the PowerPoint that we saw at the beginning of this, and her help in getting this together. Mr. Calvin Head, Mr. Leroy Johnson for this fabulous program today.
Oh, and that's my son back there who helped me put together the other part of the PowerPoint.
Hey.